This week's homework is reviewing theme, so we need to remember what theme is. Theme is sort of like the lesson that the author wants readers to learn from what they wrote, or a moral of a story. So the key thing to remember about theme is that it has to apply to the whole world, everybody in the world. It cannot be specific to the story. It's not going to have characters' names in it. It's not going to have specific story parts in it. It needs to be a general message or lesson that anybody can learn and take and apply to their life. So we're going to read a letter from Antioch, and then we're going to be thinking as we answer the questions about the theme of this letter. A letter from Antioch. Antioch, Syria, Saturday, May 23rd, AD 526. Dear Father, I write to tell you the shocking news that has happened since your departure last month. On Wednesday, Antioch suffered a terrible earthquake. Mother and I are safe, and our house is damaged but still standing. However, over 220,000 people in the city have died, and officials expect even higher numbers as the survivors search the rubble for their loved ones. Hundreds are fleeing the city, carrying their few undamaged belongings on their backs. Many of the familiar churches, markets, theaters, and monuments have been destroyed. Some buildings that withstood the initial quake collapsed during aftershocks. One of the saddest losses was the great church. Although it survived the aftershocks, it caught fire yesterday and burned. Looters are going into collapsed buildings and stealing valuables. Thieves have attacked some people who are fleeing the city, but all hope is not lost. Just this morning, brave people rescued a young woman and her child from the ruins of a house. As I write, volunteers are retrieving many of our pieces of fine mosaic art. They are loading them into boats to transport them to other locations. And messengers arrived from Emperor Justin this morning. He has pledged to help us rebuild. I wish you a safe journey and urge caution on your return. Your son, Simeon. So now that I've read it, I always like to go back and kind of think about what happened in each paragraph. This would be where I was gisting if I were on paper. I don't really have room for that using the iPad today, but if I look at this first paragraph, I know that this first paragraph, is telling a lot about the earthquake itself. Basically just informing us that there was an earthquake in Antioch. Then it moves on to the second paragraph, which describes a little bit of the damage done by the earthquake. And then this third paragraph gives us some information about what happened or what is happening after the earthquake and how people are reacting to that. So I need to keep those different things in mind as I'm answering questions. And again, if I were doing this on paper, I probably would have written little gists out to the side that explain this is about the earthquake, this is about the damage, and this is how people are reacting. I'm also now going to move over to my cake and my pie and think a little bit about the author's purpose, the point of view, and whether this is fiction or nonfiction. So, first up would be to discuss whether it's first person, second person, or third person. I know that this is a letter. It's signed your son Simeon, so I'm assuming that would mean he's the person who wrote the letter. But I am going to go ahead and go through and look for some of those words, for those pronouns, starting with the word I. It's not in quotation marks, which means it is the narrator telling the story. If I keep looking through it, I see I come up again and again. Here it is again at the very end. I, as I write. I know when we're talking about point of view that first person uses I because it's all about me. I'm number one. Second person talks about you. Third person would be he or she. And since I've used I over and over again, this letter was written and the story told by our narrator, Simeon, who calls himself I. So that makes this first person. I also need to think about whether it is a fiction piece or a nonfiction piece? And it gets a little tricky here because this is based on historical fact. Simeon is a real person. Antioch is a real place. This earthquake really happened, and it happened on that date. So there is factual information here. However, this letter was not actually written by Simeon. It's written to look as though it were written by Simeon, but I did a little bit of research because I knew that these were real people and real places and real events. And my research showed that Simeon was actually only about 6 years old at the time of this earthquake. So if I keep that in mind and I look at this letter, I'm not thinking that a 6-year-old Simeon wrote this letter. So even though there are things that are true, even though there are people that were real, the letter itself is not real, and therefore I cannot be guaranteed that everything in here is historical fact. So if I look at whether this is fiction, fake, or nonfiction, all based on fact, I have to still go ahead and say that this is fiction, because even though it's based on true events, the letter itself is not an actual letter. So this is a special type of fiction, actually, called historical fiction, meaning it is based on historical events or based around historical people, but it's still made up. So this is historical fiction. That also makes it a little tricky to think about the author's purpose, whether it was to persuade, to inform, or to entertain. Because there are things that I can learn from this letter, because it does base itself on some fact. However, I like to think about if I go to watch a big blockbuster movie that's based around historical events, things like Pompeii, or movies that take place around Titanic, or things like that, I don't go to see those movies because I want to learn about those events. I go to see those movies because those events are entertaining for me to watch. So even though I may pick up some facts or information that was true, that's not the reason that I'm watching the movie, and that's not the reason that the movie was made. So it's the same kind of thing here. Even though I may learn some things from this letter wasn't written by Simeon, and so the author who did write it didn't write it necessarily to teach me things. They wrote it because they thought I would find it entertaining to learn about the after effects of this earthquake. So I'm going to shade in my E. The next question would be number 3, which is your strategy practice question. I actually cannot do this one for you because it asks, do you think people in the past reacted any differently to disasters from the way people do today? So I can't tell you what you think. What I can tell you is that your homework page has a sentence stem provided for you, and it tells you you have to answer in a complete sentence. So start with that sentence stem. Don't just fill in the blank I drew for you. Actually write your sentence stem. And then tell me, I think people did react differently, or I think people did not react differently in the past because, and then explain why you think that. So pause while you do that, and then we'll look at number 4. Moving on to number 4. From the letter, you can conclude that. First thing I'm going to notice is that it uses the word conclude. I can conclude. And what that means to me is that it's not actually going to tell me information here. I'm concluding something based on what I've read. I'm taking the information they gave me, and I'm making an educated conclusion. I'm coming up with an educated idea about what I have read. So this is not something I'm going to be able to find the exact answer to in the passage, but I should be able to find evidence to back up my conclusion. So A says Antioch was a small village in the year AD 526. So what they're telling me is this is a small village, and that should be something I should be able to read the passage and come up with that idea on my own. So what I'm going to do is go back into the letter and look for things that maybe make me think this is a small village, or I'm going to look for things that make me think it's not. I'm looking to either prove this answer correct or prove this answer incorrect. So the first thing I notice is I have a number of people here. Now this is the number of people who died. But 220,000 people is a lot of people, especially when you consider that those are the people who died and there were more people than that. This is 526 AD. That's a lot of people for a city. So that right there makes me think it probably was not very small. But I also see more evidence of that in paragraph 2, where it says that the city had churches, markets, theaters, and monuments. It has to be a pretty good-sized city to have those things. I grew up in a really small town. My town was so small that it didn't have a theater, and it had 2 grocery stores. It didn't have a Walmart. It didn't have a Brookshire's. It didn't have a Super One. They were local grocery stores, and there was no theater because the town wasn't big enough to need those things. So I'm not seeing evidence that Antioch was a small village. In fact, I'm seeing evidence of the opposite. I'm seeing that it was a big village. So I'm going to eliminate A. B says most people were calm after the earthquake. So I should be able to find evidence that either tells me people were calm or that tells me they were not calm. So I'm going to go into my passage. And the first thing that I notice is this word right here in paragraph 1, fleeing. Fleeing means running or leaving quickly. So if I'm fleeing, I am trying to get out of there fast. Usually, I'm not going to be calm about it. If I'm trying to leave a place quickly, I'm not calm. Think about if you flee the classroom when the bell rings. You want to get out as fast as you can. You're not calm about it. So that right there tells me that people probably were not calm. Also, the fact that we have thieves attacking other people in paragraph 3. If I'm attacking people, I'm probably not going to be very calm. So B really, again, is an opposite answer from what I would say I could conclude. I can't conclude that they are calm. I can conclude that they're not calm. Now I'm going to look at C. C says that I can conclude as days pass, the death toll will decrease. So I know that decrease means it's going to go down, which doesn't make sense. If the death toll is already 220,000 people, there's no way for that number to go down or to get smaller unless people come back to life, which isn't going to happen. So right away, I can eliminate that answer choice because it just doesn't even make any sense. However, if I needed evidence, in first paragraph, it says that officials expect even higher numbers of people who have died. So they're saying they expect those numbers to get bigger because who really would expect the numbers to get smaller? That just doesn't make sense. So boy, I hope D is good. D says, I can conclude in AD 526 that Antioch was a large, cultured city. Well, that sounds good because in answer choice A, we talked about how it was not small. The evidence we found about the churches and markets and theaters and the number of people told us, in fact, that it was big. And large is just a synonym for big. So D is my answer. Number 5. Why are people probably fleeing the city? So, we've got fleeing there, which we now know means running or leaving. I like to say running just because it shows me that there's not that calm feeling there, but leaving the city or fleeing. And then it also uses the word probably, which means I'm not going to be able to find that answer spelled out for me in the paragraph. I'm looking for evidence to base my own conclusions on. So why are people fleeing the city? A says they're afraid to be caught with stolen items. Well, if I look at paragraph 3, the sentence I already started highlighting in paragraph 3, it says, thieves have attacked some people who are fleeing the city. So if the people who are fleeing the city are stealing things, then what we have here are thieves stealing things from people who have already stolen them. That doesn't make any sense to me. So I don't think the people who are fleeing are the people who stole things. I think if I wanted to steal items from the city, I'd have to stick around in the city to steal them. So I'm going to eliminate A. B says people are probably fleeing because they're afraid of more earthquakes. I would definitely think that that is a possibility, that they're afraid of it happening again. Once you survive one natural disaster, you don't want to have to survive through another one. But what also helps me think that may be a correct answer is the last sentence in paragraph 1. It says, hundreds are fleeing, there's that word, hundreds are fleeing the city, carrying their few undamaged belongings on their backs. So not only are they fleeing the city, but they're not planning on coming back. I know that because they're taking their belongings with them. So if they're taking everything with them, they're not planning on coming back. The only thing I can think of that would keep them from wanting to come back would be the fact that they have experienced earthquakes there and they don't want to go through that again. So I think B is a pretty good option. Answer choice C says they are going to search for lost loved ones. If they lost loved ones in the earthquake, it would have been in that city. They're not going to be able to leave the city and then find the loved ones that they lost in the city. If I want to find them, I got to stay where I lost them. So that doesn't make any sense. D says they want to save the city's mosaics. Again, the city's mosaics are in the city. So if they want to save those mosaics, they have to stay in the city to save them. They cannot save the city's mosaics by leaving the city. So D cannot be right, which means my best answer choice is B. So now comes your secret direction to prove to me that you're actually sitting through the video. What I want you to do is go up to the title and draw a big box around the title. That lets me know that you put in the work and the effort to watch through the whole video. So draw a box around your title. Don't tell anybody that was the secret instruction. And then let's look at number 6. Number 6 says, which theme does the letter communicate? So I know that if I'm talking about theme, I'm talking about a lesson that I can learn from reading this letter. A says most people stay calm during catastrophes. We've already found evidence that showed us people were not calm. So if people in the passage were not calm, then the passage is not really going to teach me to be calm, because that's not true that they were calm during catastrophes. It doesn't say I should be calm. It says most people are calm, and this passage does not show me evidence of that. B says, people only appreciate what they have after they lose it. That sounds really good, but I don't see any evidence of it in the passage. I don't see people losing things and then learning that they should have appreciated them. So even though it sounds like a good lesson, it's not a lesson I can learn from this passage. C says, even in tragedy, good things happen. I have evidence of tragedy in the passage. tragedy is a bad or a sad thing. An earthquake is definitely bad and sad. So there is tragedy here. Even in tragedy, good things happen. So now I need to see if there were good things. And there were, especially in that last paragraph. Simeon, or author, uses the phrase, "All hope is not lost." And then he points out some good things that are coming out of this tragedy. Brave people rescued a young woman. Volunteers are retrieving many of our pieces of fine mosaic art. And the emperor has pledged to help us rebuild. Those are all really good things that have come out of this sad event. So this letter is a good example of how even in tragedy, good things happen. It's a good answer choice. I'm going to double check and make sure D is not better. D says, saving people is more important than protecting art. That to me is one of those answer choices they put in just to see if you're paying attention. The whole letter is not about saving people, and it's definitely not all about protecting art. So my best answer is C. And finally, number 7. How does Simeon feel about Antioch? How does he feel? I have to think about it. It's not going to tell me directly in the passage. Would Simeon feel sad about the city's destruction? We do know that the city was destroyed basically by this earthquake, so I would think he feels pretty sad about that. I'm going to look and see if I see any evidence of him feeling sad. And in the very first paragraph, I see some words like shocking news. He uses verbs like suffered and adjectives like terrible. So those are some pretty negative words that tell me he's feeling badly about this, about these events. I would say he's probably sad. In the second paragraph, he actually uses the word saddest. So I'm thinking A is a pretty good answer choice. B says disgusted by the city's crime rate. There's not really talk about the city's crime rate. He does talk about looting, but that's basically it. He doesn't focus on the fact that there's crime. I'm going to eliminate that. C says he's frustrated by the city's leadership. Well, the city's leadership would be the emperor, and the emperor is helping. So I don't think he would be frustrated by the fact that the leadership or that the emperor is helping. So it's not C. D says he is amused by the emperor's offer. Amused means I find it entertaining or funny. So basically what answer choice D is saying is he thinks the fact that the emperor's offering to help is funny. And I don't see him laughing at that. He sounds pretty grateful to the emperor for offering to help. So my answer is A. Good luck on the back.